Good afternoon and welcome to From Tension to Teamwork, Effective Conflict Resolution for Organizational Success. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Raleigh Merrill with GTM Payroll and HR. In a moment, I'll introduce you to our presenter, Sarah Martin. But first, if you have questions for Sarah today, use the questions functionality on the upper right of your screen. You'll see a small box up there with a question mark in it. Just click on that to ask your question, and we'll get to as many of your questions as we can as time permits at the end of Sarah's presentation. Also, later today, look for an email from GTM with a video recording as well as a PDF version of today's presentation. Our presenter today, Sarah Martin, a senior HR consultant for GTM. Sarah has 25 years of comprehensive human resources experience with expertise that include many years in associate relations conflict resolution, as well as leading many employee engagement initiatives. Sarah has a commitment to bringing people together to ensure job satisfaction, efficiency, and teamwork whenever possible. Before joining GTM, Sarah spent 18 years at Price Chopper as a human resources manager. And now at this point, I'd like to turn things over to our presenter. Here is Sarah Martin.
Thank you so much, Raleigh. And thank you, everybody who is joining here for this very important topic and more important than ever, in my opinion. Did you know that relationships can actually be strengthened when there is conflict? Right? When there's conflict and repair. So I want you to think about that with, whether it be a coworker, whether it be your partner, family, friends, where maybe there was a difference of opinion or an actual conflict where there was some space, and then you decided to come back together. And I have a friend of mine, and we call it taking apart the trap, right? Of, okay, what happened there? Right? What happened? Because it probably wasn't about the cap on the toothpaste, right? So, those things that build, or so many times it's not about the other person at all, right? It's about what's going on with us. And we'll talk a lot about that today. But there is proven studies that when this happens and you go back for that repair, or taking apart that trap and just kind of saying, oh, well, this is where I was at. This is where I was at. And sometimes you gain this newer understanding, and then you don't walk in that trap again. Right. So it's really, really powerful to do this. But let me ask you this. Where do you stand when it comes to conflict? Right? Anyone else conflict avoidant? Can we raise a hand here? Is anybody like, oh, I can't wait to see what kind of conflict happens today? Just raise a hand if you kind of identify as, I try to avoid conflict, right? Thank you. Thank you, Mary, for sure, right? And this is how we are all programmed. So, we are being programmed from age 0 to 10, right? Our brains are forming, and some will say till 25, really the brains are forming, but those deep neural pathways and the way we learn how to relate to others, a lot of that comes from our immediate family. So when we think about, as a kid, you're full of questions, and sometimes a lot of times you're fine to be in opposition and say no. But what are you taught, right? Be nice, get along, share your things. So it's wired into us to be good, right? And that questioning things, and again, depending how you were brought up, some parents are like, question everything. But a lot of times, certainly it's not a natural standpoint for us to, want to have an opinion that's not popular, or say, I really don't agree with that, right? And especially in a work setting, that can be difficult, but it's certainly necessary as well. Is it actually possible to avoid conflict? Right? Has anybody tried that? Has anybody just, no, I'm just going with this. I'm just going with this. And, a lot of different things can happen. I will share my own personal experience is I kind of self-coach myself. Oh, no, that's okay. That's okay. Or I'm giving people benefit of the doubt over and over. And then maybe I'm a little extra stressed about something or something's going on personally with me, and then it's a problem. And then I'm saying something I wish I didn't say, or in a tone I wish I didn't say it because I didn't address it the, second or third time I saw it. We may talk about that rule of threes when, something feels like, okay, this isn't sitting well with me and I want to address it. And, things are, much easier addressed when it's the second or third time versus when you have just reached your limit, right? So some people will tend to be a little more energetic about it. Some people will check out altogether and just ignore it altogether. But we all know, right? The issue gets bigger and the tension gets higher. So there's lots of consequences to avoiding conflict, which is why we are here, right? So certainly gossip is a big piece of what can really just cause strife and distraction, mistrust, misinformation within the workplace, right? And it is a big way which people bond with each other. Right? There's, magazines and, all of these things that really sell us gossip. So it's very natural in a workplace to get hooked in that. I've been really excited to do some work with some of my clients that is helping kind of, vet that out by starting to create a culture where we'll have courageous conversations. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a few slides. But when we're gossiping, especially if you're a leader or a manager, think about that, right? If a friend gossips to you, don't you think, oh gosh, is she talking about me too? Or is he talking about me too? So when we do that, we might think, oh, but I trust this person. Eventually, or it is the natural inclination to say, if they're talking about me, I'm sure they're talking, or if they're talking about someone else, I'm sure they're talking about me. So it creates a lot of mistrust. It takes up a lot of time. I will say when I was at the grocery retailer, they moved managers a lot and we reorganized a lot. And for good reason, for fresh eyes and all of the things, but the speculation and the time that people took speculating of who was getting moved here and who was going there. Oh my goodness. There was a lot of, groceries that could have been being stocked and sold at that time. So really you just want to be able to keep people focused, and certainly the misinformation that happens in this forum, right? Again, with all that scenario at the stores, I just always said, listen, I'm not listening to any of it until it actually happens because it's all speculation at this point. Which is a good way if you have that in your organization. And I'll give you some buzzwords, things to help move things along. But I think first and foremost, just make sure you're committing to being part of the solution as far as having some scary conversations, not gossiping. And certainly, this can create a lack of accountability when we are not addressing conflict, performance issues. I've seen that so many times because these are difficult conversations to have. And sometimes they're the most difficult people that you have on staff that you have to have a difficult conversation with, right? So that's almost the double whammy. But when you let it go unchecked, and these might be your C players, or sometimes it's your A player, right? Somebody who's a great performer but has a really bad attitude, that can be tough to manage as well. But we'll talk about that. But a lot of times, if it's kind of your C player, or even if it's your A player with a bad attitude, you've got your B pluses that are your reliable people that are making it work, every single day with their head down and focused on your business, your service, your customers. Those are the people who get really frustrated with gossip and conflict not being addressed, issues not being addressed. They want their managers and supervisors to address issues. So it can continue to build conflict. You can end up again with disgruntled employees and certainly high turnover. There's many financial costs when it comes to avoiding conflict or not dealing with issues. Like I said, the increased turnover when people, they always say, and I'm sure you guys have read studies that, people don't leave companies, they leave managers and supervisors or work environments. So if it feels toxic, if they don't feel like they're being supported, if they don't feel valued, they will not stay. You can certainly incur legal costs if you allow conflicts to escalate to the point of grievances and, looking at settlements and even just time if people are, um, you know, um, contacting human rights and having charges against the organization. You certainly don't want that, both for financial and publicity reasons. You can lose business when people are distracted or have poor morale. Healthcare costs, certainly people are stressed and burned out. Sometimes people can really let some of these relationships consume them. I have seen it, and we want to make sure that, we're paying attention to the whole person at work. It's not just about coming in and producing these days. People are expecting a lot from employers. And certainly the training and recruitment costs of retaining the training and recruitment costs of hiring somebody else. Most of you are probably familiar with that cost. The average cost of turnover ranges from 1/2 to 2 times an employee's annual salary. That's both the hiring and the training, indirect costs, lost productivity, customer loss. We all know that feeling of, when we're short staffed. And, quite honestly, I do understand that sometimes that's why we're avoiding conflict or we're not managing somebody as much as we could, because it's better to have the C player than no one at all. But I would challenge that. I would challenge that. It's funny. I also was conflict avoidant before taking on this job. Before Price Chopper, I worked for Freihofer's. If you're local, you know the bakery. It was part of Best Foods. And I would listen to my boss. It was a union environment. And I did most of the administrative work. And, I would listen to my boss and all the mediation and the conflict management. I was like, I never want to do that. And then I got to Price Chopper and I was just doing it. And it's become a passion of mine because I see the outcomes, right? I see the outcome of when somebody finally deals with that person that, again, I just watched this at a client of mine, really good performer, but just that posture, right? Always talking about somebody, always had that negative lens. And, we'll talk about this. We can manage that as performance, but this person, got another job, probably because we were starting to address it, and things are just so much better. Like it feels better in this office. So I'm sure you've probably all had that experience that, really the investment in making sure you're addressing it is worth it. So the goals today, we've already talked about the cost of the organization. We're going to talk about proactive relationship building. We're going to talk about managing ourselves in difficult conversations. We're going to talk about what's at the root of many issues, learn how to deal with difficult people, the power of our self-awareness and others. This has been huge in my career. I love this stuff. I love finding out what makes people tick. And again, when we have more of an awareness of people that are different than ourselves, it helps us to manage conflict and communicate better all around. And certainly we'll talk about challenging behavior as a performance issue. So can you just type in the chat, what kind of current challenges do you have? We got a couple questions ahead of time, and I'll address those at the end, which I think are wonderful. The a power balance, right? When you have conflict, but it's above you. People showing up late, we'll talk about that. And I love a restaurant question. I grew up in the restaurant business, so kind of back of the house versus front of the house. We'll talk about that. But anyone else have something that they want to ask about or talk about as far as the challenges right now? Okay, Trevor. All right, so I can talk about what's happening, right? And this I wrote probably shortly after COVID, when we thought we were seeing the worst of things, right? And I will always say this right now. I feel like we have the most divisive society and some of the most sensitive people at the same time, which is a really it's just a recipe for a lot of conflict and a lot of tension. So, people are uncertain. There's a lot of fear out there. And people don't understand that fear is driving their bus. People are stressed out. Again, the division and, spills over into everyday interactions. People are easily triggered when they're overwhelmed, and we're going to talk about that. People are especially emotional when it comes to their kids, money, politics, and feeling respected and valued. So, really, what's most in our control, I believe, is making sure people feel respected and valued, right? And hopefully, and obviously paid correctly. So, we're really going to focus on that piece of things. But instability is also on the rise with all the political divide, lots of chaos. And social media, I believe, has really given rise to us saying things we wouldn't say to somebody's face, right? And so maybe that spills over the way people end up talking to each other, because they'll type it to somebody, and now all of a sudden it's okay to talk to somebody in a demeaning way or a disrespectful way. So I always talk about then and now, right? We had the golden rule, like depending, again, I'm sure we have all generations on here. So I would say, probably as much as 15 years ago, it was golden rule. It was treat people how you want to be treated, right? And that's pretty easy because I know how I want to be treated. Now we really flip to what I call the platinum rule. Treat me how I want to be treated. Oh boy, okay, now I have to be a mind reader, right? Now I don't really know. And especially if there is a generational gap or, just a lot of differences make it difficult for me to know how someone wants to be treated. And that's where those courageous conversations come in. So, how are we dealing with all of that? It starts with proactive relationship building. And I don't know about you, but this was the stuff that was fairly difficult for me when I was stressed out. There was a lot of conflict. We all have our own personal lives and things going on. So this is can be the hard part when maybe we're not as engaged as we need to be at work. So, sometimes fake it till you make it. But again, if you're a manager, if you're a supervisor, if you're a coworker, just get to know people, right? Find some common ground, right? We may be on opposite ends of a political spectrum, but we both have a corgi dog, right? Or we both love cats. I love gardening. Focus on what we have in common versus what we don't. um, Learn about people's pets, their hobbies, their family. And I'm not talking every single thing, but again, that's what to me makes life interesting. And we'll talk about this when I talk about, the self-awareness and the disc assessment and that kind of thing. But, someone like me, it's very natural to make small talk and, get to know people. Other people might need to stretch a little bit more. I had a manager at Price Chopper, and best store manager, made the most money, just was excellent with customers and sales and building merchandise, and financially profitable, got award after award. I got so many calls about this person, and the calls were just that he didn't treat people well. And it wasn't intentional. It's just this person had a drive, right? They were going to go build that display. They're going to do their thing. And I said, you know what? I said, just walk your store in the morning, say hello. Say hello, say good morning. And it's surprising to me. That's, again, I am more of an extrovert. So it is comfortable for me to do that. It's very surprising how many times that doesn't happen in environments. So I just, again, if there's something you can take away from this, start making a round in the morning. Most of us are like, I have 1,100 things to do. No, I'm telling you, your life and your work environment and your relationships will get stronger if you just poke around and say good morning. Sometimes the wave through a window. So, certainly making that commitment to yourself, to your team, taking a look at like what are your deposits and withdrawals, seeking out ways to make deposits. And, a lot of times if you're the boss, you're making a lot of withdrawals. And this is, another thing that I work on a lot with people who have been in the workforce a long time. When I was coming into the workforce, it was you foresee your boss's needs. They say jump, you say how high. I always liken management to how we were parented. So a lot of us, if we grew up that way, right, be heard, not seen, we were pleasers. We were going to do the thing. And now people, and good for this generation, right, understanding, really wanting work-life balance and really demanding, respect and collaboration and wanting to be valued at work. So we want to make sure that we're making deposits for people too. Obviously, first impressions are important. You want to really partner somebody up with someone else that can help teamwork and team building. You want to make sure you're giving praise. Certainly, regular team building opportunities like an annual picnic, volunteer work, 5Ks, formal training sessions. I have to tell you, GTM is so awesome at making sure there's opportunities for everyone to get together. There's a fun squad, there's a wellness team, they do a monthly happy hour put on by a department. And there's just a lot of, again, opportunity to do some cross pollination. There's a volunteer committee. So one of the questions, about the back of the house and the front of the house, and I know that can be hard in the restaurant business. I did grow up in the restaurant business, and I know that tension for sure, because it's a fast-paced business, and a lot of times I was, front of the house, and if there was an issue with a customer, I had to go to the back of the house, and they didn't want to hear it. So, I do understand that it can be a challenge, but, is there an annual picnic where people bring their families and they get to know each other a little bit more? Maybe there's a little job shadow situation, and this can be anywhere. I always wanted this at Price Chopper, where I wanted management to come in and run the deli for a day, because a lot of times I felt like, and other people felt like, oh, nobody cares if 3 people called in, like, but if anybody's watched Undercover Boss, a little job swap or shadow can be really helpful in having people get to know each other. So again, I think you can get creative with that. And most importantly here, taking care of yourself, right? So we're going to talk about that. And, that sometimes easier said than done, but maybe some of you have seen this little meme going around on social media, and it talks about, if you're carrying a cup of coffee, somebody bumps into you, what spills out of the cup? It's coffee, right? It's not water. So if I'm carrying around stress and frustration, and it's the 9th thing that this person did that I'm just piling up. I haven't spoken to them about it when I should have spoke to them on the 3rd time, right? And they bump into me, I'm probably spewing out stress and frustration and all the things, right? But if I'm taking care of myself, which, hopefully outside of, having some work-life balance, learning the importance of our breath, We'll talk about that. I know it's something we're doing all the time, but the saying, "Hey, take a deep breath," is there for a reason. So remembering to do it can be the hard part, especially when there is tension. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But really inquiring, what am I doing to take care of myself? When's the last time I just took a day off, right? So to make sure that when we get bumped, we're holding that a little bit more, and that we can hold compassion and empathy, which is really what most people are looking for. In most relationships, your personal relationships and your work relationships, sometimes more at work, people are looking for solutions. So many times they just want to be heard, seen, and understood. This is the human condition, right? So sometimes just, I call it smile and nod. Smile, maybe not smile, but definitely, engaged and listening, and really, which again, sometimes in this busy time, we don't make enough time for it. So I always like to say too, in the taking care of yourself, the compassion piece starts with yourself. If you're super hard on yourself, if you ruminate on things, you're probably really hard on others too. So start watching that pattern as well. Always thinking about the other side. Again, social media and these memes are always good reminders, right? Of like all of us have something going on underneath, outside of work, some kind of worry, some kind of whatever it is, right? And some people mask it really, really well. And there's just one of my favorite stories. And again, I'm dating myself. If everybody knows Stephen Covey and the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, tells a story about this man on the train, on the subway in New York City. It's the end of the day. And, Stephen's had a really long day and is just stressed out. And these kids are running all over the subway car. And, he's trying to bite his tongue, but he's like, oh my God. He's like, this guy is not even paying attention. Like, somebody control these kids. So he looks at the guy and is like, are you going to do something about your kids? And he looks at him and he says, I'm sorry. We're just coming from the hospital. Their mom just passed away and they're not handling it well. Right. So I think we've all had those moments where we're aggravated or we're frustrated, or we have a perception of what's happening, and then the truth comes in. So again, just getting to the bottom of that too, making sure that when you're dealing with conflict and people, you're asking, hey, what's going on behind all of this? Certainly, trying on when you were in that situation, removing a personal bias with that person, right? Sometimes, and we'll talk about this too, of what to do with people who complain a lot, who have a lot of ideas. Sometimes those are the people who care the most, believe it or not. So we want to make sure we're giving those people enough attention as well. But again, we want to empathize, repeat what you heard, be willing to be wrong. So we want to make sure we're valuing the work that people are hired to do. We do not want to micromanage, right? Remembering that there are more ways to point D than just A, B, C, D, right? They might have some loops. So let the person have that latitude to get the work done the way that they want to. A lot of times we have a very strong idea of how it should be done, but giving people latitude, and making sure that they feel valued and that they're contributing. So you want people, again, and you want that, right? You want all these different perspectives coming to you. So making sure that you share results at staff meetings, making sure that if you have a quieter group, you're going around the table. You give assignments for what people can bring to the table, ideas, thoughts, so that you're not the only one talking at a meeting. Make it a collaboration. So again, I talked about the courageous conversations. We want to listen, pause, consider a compromise. And, before coming on here, I was talking to a coworker and I said, the pause is my life's work. I talk fast. I do a lot of things fast. So I've come a long way. And that pause is important, and not interrupting. And that's where my breathing comes in a lot, because most of us are listening to respond. We're not listening to understand. We want to get it right. We want to say the right thing. And coming back to that, that's not what most people want. And especially in conflict and people are a little more heated, they're not doing a great job listening to you either. So it's really the listening and understanding. And sometimes you want to pause in between and come back and ask for solutions. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. And I want to talk about one of my favorite things that I do here at GTM, which is disc training and training in general. So do a lot of one-on-one coaching, and also group disc training. So some of you may have some familiarity with this, or there's Myers-Briggs. There's a lot of different kind of work tendency programs out there. Myers-Briggs is a little more personal. That's what I like about DISC is we do really just stick to what the work tendencies are. And it's probably a 35-minute assessment and it's dynamic. So it really, based on the questions you're answering, it can keep probing for more and really get pretty specific about someone's tendencies. So it just really helps understanding people's different communication styles, decision-making preferences, and it's based on dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. So measuring the proclivity towards collaboration or autonomy. So do people like to work together or alone? And also proclivity toward quick decision making or weighing in facts, right? So you can see the circle here. I won't go into that, but I do a lot of fun team building. I've done some kind of self-assessments for groups, and it's amazing. It's just amazing with some of these exercises, the things that come out, and people are like, oh my gosh, this is like so me. And then getting to know your coworkers, right? So I'll give an example. I have here that it helps with the platinum rule. So I'm on that. So, and the closer you are to the outside of the circle, the stronger your proclivity. So I am on the outside of the circle as an influencer. Again, talk fast, small talk, extroverted until I'm not. But so I am people oriented and a quick decision maker. So if we look kind of the opposite quadrant is that conscientious person, right? So it can be your accountants, right? And there's no one that's better than the other, right? We want all these pieces. But a conscientious person, again, accountant, I always tell a story that I wish I had this when I was in my 20s, because I was a receptionist at an accounting firm. And I would go in to bring this Redweld file to the accountant. I would give it to him and he would just stare at me and I would say the stupidest things. I was, so I would counsel myself, like, he doesn't want to talk to you, Sarah. So I would counsel myself, go in, hand the file, walk away. So I'm super conscious of when I'm talking too much. Sometimes it's 4 minutes too late, but it makes me really, really conscious. And when someone's asking me 7 questions about something that I think should be simple and we should just be moving on, I can be more patient because I know that person needs that information in order to make decisions to feel comfortable to move on. So that's just a small example of how it can help us really understand one another more. So is conflict management and this kind of training worth the investment? They say that engaged employees are 24% less likely to turn over, and a Gallup poll in 2022 said that engaged employees help to increase profits by as much as 21%, and I would guess that that's probably more. Collaboration, innovation, customer service, sales. We all know, how things are when people care. And certainly found that companies with comprehensive training programs have 218% higher income per employee than those with less comprehensive training. And again, that goes back to that new hire training. That is your opportunity to make sure somebody's comfortable, they know what they need to do. You can use your more seasoned employees to help them, which gives them more job satisfaction as well. And certainly minimizing risks when it comes to claims. So really important here, not ignoring problem employees, right? But it's so much easier to just sweep it under the rug. But remember, we went back to that, can we really avoid conflict? No, right? So we want to do this for our good employees. We want to do this for our problem employees. I'm going to guess some of you have had this problem employee, or again, a price shopper. People grew up in the grocery business, right? So you're 17 years old. So were they the best employee at 17? No, but when somebody, paid some attention to them and gave them some feedback and tips and tools, all of a sudden, maybe they were the best store manager we ever had 12 years later, right? So you want to pay attention to people. And again, it can be hard to gauge, how much time to spend with somebody, but certainly ask questions. What can I do to help? Put the solution back on them. This is what's happening. Tell me, how you think this can be corrected. Focus on the behavior, and certainly tell the person what is expected, and make sure that you're following up and holding them accountable. So when there is conflict and we have to watch ourselves too, right? Because some people who are passionate, right, who are a little on the louder side, do maybe talk a little faster. The dominant side of that circle through DISC is the quick decision maker, but fact oriented, right? So they're not so considerate of people's feelings and all the things. So they might just get right to the point. Let's get this done. And you might feel like you're plowed over. So that can help as well to say, okay, that's their dominant personality. Doesn't mean they don't need to be given feedback if it is, causing conflict. So you can kind of consider who you're dealing with. If you have some of that information, you want to breathe, right? Soften your belly. I call it like moving back. And I think that's on the next slide, but it's like, so much when somebody's coming at us, it's like that energy, usually the most powerful energy is what hooks us. So again, we get in that defense mode. It can feel personal. So we have to just breathe and stick to facts, right? Using empathy to respond, finding that common ground, and knowing that you might not solve the issue right here. Again, most people really just want to be heard. So we talked about that backing up. So again, if you feel yourself like leaning in a chair, leaning closer, it's like, what? Make space, right? I'm making physical space, I'm making energetic space, and I'm softening everything. This is not life or death. My nervous system might think so, but we're okay. So again, the listening, not making it personal. You want to make sure if there's a true issue, and certainly, that's the other place where human resources can come into play. If it's something very serious, I always say get a partner. You want to make sure, if it's something that could, create a hostile work environment or it's getting heated, you want to get a partner and involve human resources or another mediator. So certainly when dealing with anger, this is, a real touchy subject, because I think people want to shut down at the very instant of somebody being frustrated or expressing emotion. It's interesting that, sometimes there's an expectation you don't have any emotions at work. And guess what? If you care about your job, you might have some emotions. So, certainly allowing somebody to be frustrated, that's okay. And if they are communicating in proper channels. And for someone like me and somebody who's on the top half of that circle where they're fast, I had a boss who, when I would get work, and I would get worked up about stuff because I cared. Okay, it wasn't malice, it was because I cared. And she would talk to me like this. Okay, Sarah. It took me a year or two to realize I started mirroring her, right? So you can do that. If you've had kids, you probably, again, I do highlight a lot of parenting to management. So you can think about some of those tools that you've done, or maybe even distraction. But certainly staying focused on the solution, putting it back to them, or sometimes saying, "Hey, I hear you, but there's really nothing we can do here right at this time." So, you know, letting that be. But of course, a focus on if it feels even a touch violent, somebody's out of hand, you absolutely ask them to leave the workplace. You get a partner. You just can't be too safe in this day and age. Some helpful phrases as far as understanding. I understand why you're feeling this way. I can hear you're upset. I would be too if that happened to me. Now, again, only if that's true, right? And that we're not making somebody else in the wrong. So sometimes, you know, I learned the hard way in HR, you have to be careful about too much agreement, right? Because if I'm saying, oh, I understand, then I'm making that other person wrong if it's a conflict between two people. But certainly, just listening. We talked about that common ground. I'm sorry that happened. Please know I'm taking this seriously. And, and making sure that you're looking into things. And again, if it does involve somebody and it sounds like things are going to need to be investigated, I always recommend a written statement from that person. And we never want to assume. Trust me, I did a harassment prevention training last week, and I said, geez, I was trying to think about how many investigations I've probably done over my lifetime. I would say at least 500. And there's times where I thought I knew and I didn't know. So be careful. Sometimes we assume things based on who it is or a previous history. And again, getting all sides of the story. I always say the truth is usually somewhere down the middle. So making sure you get a partner for those more difficult um, areas of conflict. We also want to be willing to compromise. Again, if you have some deeper relationships or friendships, we know that sometimes it just doesn't pay to try to be right. And I love the saying, would you rather be right or would you rather be better? Right. And these are the companies that flourish, the companies that are actually listening to the ideas around the table that might seem outlandish. They're the first ones to market with certain things, right? Sometimes we get in an environment where you just learn not to speak up because either it's going to be dismissed or someone's going to overtalk you. So you want to make sure you're fostering that environment where people, are allowed to make mistakes. They're allowed to have outlandish ideas. And, again, maybe you encourage people to bring these ideas to meetings. Certainly not being married to an outcome. So making sure that, if we're going down this road, be willing to say, oops, wrong road, we got to turn around. People really, really respect that. I find that a lot of people have a hard time with that. I used to have somebody who would say, is this the hill you want to die on? Right? I would get passionate about the most benign, silliest thing. And no, it wasn't worth my time or energy for something that, maybe wasn't going to change. And certainly making sure that it's not a breach of values. That's, definitely a disciplinary situation. If there's a breach of values, and certainly disciplinary situation. A lot of employers struggle with this as far as, somebody asked about, tardiness or, a bad attitude as a performance issue. Right? So people don't understand. Again, I could be producing my work all day long. If I'm talking negatively about my boss and it's continuously getting back to the boss or someone else, or I just, I'm cursing all it, whatever it is, these can be performance issues. It's not just about the job. It's, I'm supposed to show up here with a can-do attitude and good ideas as well. If I'm just over here mixing the pot, that's a performance issue. So that's something else that we help people with as HR consultants. And you'd really be surprised that some people just need that courageous conversation. So, I have one client and they kind of helped me formulate this is that They don't want anyone blindsided. They're very conscious of people's backgrounds and trauma and nervous system regulation. So they will use the term, can I have a courageous conversation? So that somebody could say, hey, can it be tomorrow? Like my dog died yesterday. I can't handle courageous conversation again. You don't always have that luxury, but it kind of prepares you both to maybe soften a little bit. And it's something that you can talk to staff about. So certainly those are some tips and tools for conflict resolution, taking good care of yourself, proactive relationship building, getting ahead of it so that there's more trust when there is some conflict. You want compassion and empathy for yourself first, listening to understand versus responding, pausing and breathing, constant reminders that will change your life all in itself, summarizing to work towards a solution, being open to compromise, and then making sure you're checking back in, right? Sometimes we're like, ooh, we resolved the conflict. Do not make eye contact ever again. You don't want to do that. You really want to check in 2 or 3 weeks later. Hey, how's it going? Hey, is that any better? And be willing to go at it again if it's not. So I appreciate, like I said, I definitely the pause is my challenge. I think I'm kind of on time, but certainly open for questions.
All right, Sarah, thank you very much for your very informative presentation today. We're going to get to some questions from our webinar attendees in just a moment. First, I want to take a moment and mention a few related and valuable HR services from GTM that can help you with conflict resolution in the workplace. First, a GTM HR audit conducted by one of our certified HR consultants. This service can identify improvement areas to help ensure compliance with legal and regulatory requirements. Areas covered by a GTM HR audit can include compliance, best practices, performance, and competitiveness. Also, we can offer a cultural review, again, conducted by one of our certified HR consultants. It's a detailed report containing in depth findings from confidential surveys and interviews with your employees. GTM will provide specific recommendations based on HR best practices along with your organizational structure. And finally, DISC assessments and training. DISC is a personal development learning experience that helps foster an engaged, collaborative, and adaptive culture that drives results. Training helps participants integrate DISC into their day to day work lives, reducing conflict and avoiding misunderstandings. Now, on to your questions. We had some questions come through during the registration process, and if you'd like to try to get a question in right now, you can use the question functionality in that little box up to the upper right there. And here we go. First question. Are you ready, Sarah? This one's for you. They're all for you. How do you approach conflict resolution when there's a power imbalance, such as a conflict within leadership or a leader and the team?
Yes. Yeah, that's challenging. There's a couple different things. I feel like that is definitely where human resources can be helpful. In maybe going to that person with the specifics of what it is. So again, I don't know if it's leadership here, and then it's tough when it comes down. I used to experience this a lot with a store manager, co-manager, and again, I go back to that parenting relationship, right? If there's a schism there between mom and dad, a lot of times it causes issues. It causes a lack of direction, unified direction. So this is one of those courageous conversations, right? That again, if you have HR, certainly talk to them about it. Maybe talk to a trusted leadership person, somebody that you do trust, and preface it with, this is really difficult for me, but I have to tell you that this is impacting my work, and I want to share that with you. Give somebody the opportunity to become aware and take corrective action.
Sarah, tell us about the consequences for unreliability, such as employees showing up late habitually.
Yes. So most places, and again, this is something GTM does. We kind of say the sweet spot, right? Of smaller organizations. I work with many that, like, they were entrepreneurs. They had 3 or 5 people, and they just kind of did what they wanted, 20 years ago or whatever, and then grown and grown and grown and grown, just like GTM. And now they need structure. Now they need policies. Now they need a handbook, right? So a lot of places will have a policy about tardiness. If and you can just abide by that. If, it's more of an administrative situation, again, it goes back to a performance issue. You mark things down. Like I said, I usually have the rule of threes of I'm gonna mention it, I'm gonna talk to you about it, and on that third time, I love the term, I'm going to need to handle this more formally, because I think people struggle to write someone up or put pen to paper. I know, in some environments I've been in, it's like, "Oh, I don't want to be that person, right? That's the mean person." Well, some people are not going to change their behavior until, I had someone who used to say, you dangle them from a cliff a little bit, right? They know you mean it, right? And there's consequences to that. So progressive discipline can be helpful with any of that, with lateness, with missing time, with again, negative attitudes.
All right, Sarah, we heard from somebody apparently they work at a restaurant, maybe they're a manager there. We are a team, but due to having a back of the house crew in the kitchen and a front of the house crew, the guest facing employees, it creates a big. How do we best manage this?
You're right. So I talked about that a little bit in the presentation, as far as, and again, it's, restaurants, big time, but many places, right? Like with GTM, we have a lot of remote employees, or, you have locations all throughout the country. And, I think it feels like an investment, and people are probably like, oh, we just don't have the spend for that. But there's things you can do online as team building. Again, the more people know each other as human beings, and who has the corgi dog, and who loves cats, and who's into anime, and where those common denominators are, the better off you're going to be. Right. So again, team building, maybe it's a 5K walk, maybe it's a volunteer opportunity, maybe, it is, regular staff meetings, regular touch points of communication, where there's an all staff meeting every 3 months. And people might roll their eyes, and they're so busy and they're already working so many hours. But trust me, when you bring people together, especially in person, it helps. It just really does. So, yeah, lots of different ideas. And um, we always have Google and AI now as our friends. So, yeah, hey, what can I do for team building? And again, people might roll their eyes or think it's stupid, or we're going to do an egg toss. We did so much of this at Price Chopper. It was awesome. And like I said, GTM does it too. Like, it sounds goofy, but like, it's something that lightens the day and brings people together. So highly recommend having a little fun.
Fun, always fun. Well, Sarah, thank you very much for sharing your expertise today. It's all the time we have for your questions today, folks. But if you have additional questions, conflict resolution in the workplace, feel free to contact Sarah directly. And if you're interested in learning more about the many GTM HR consulting services, contact Keto Delgado. The contact information for both Keto and Sarah are right there on your screen. We thank you all for joining us today. Be sure to look for that email today that includes the video recording and the PDF version of today's presentation. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Riley. Thank you, everybody.
There,